Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We were just going through a number of items in this meeting, and we're now going to turn to two different presentations that are done by two commissioners, two teams that we thought might be of interest to the public. The first is going to be by Commissioner Rowan DeStito and Paul Francis of the SAGE project, which is on strategic sourcing, so to speak, and the way the state is operating its real estate portfolio. As I've said before, and as we talk about all the time, a big function of the state government is just the operations of agencies. You know, in this building we tend to talk about the legislature and what bills pass and what bills don't pass and the politics of it. But day to day, the meat and potatoes of state government is operating agencies and operating them well. And there is a lot of work to do to improve the operations of these agencies. For decades, I think you've seen a decline in the efficiency and the effectiveness of state agencies, and basically an inattention to the operation of the machine. So, as we said back in January, it's about performance, it's about integrity, it's about making sure every tax dollar goes where it's supposed to go, and just finding better ways to operate the state government. So we give the taxpayer better service, and we give the client better service. And one of the projects is called Strategic Sourcing. The Commissioner of OGS, as you know, is vitally involved in purchasing and management issues and operation issues all across the state government. So with that, I'm going to turn it over first to Paul Francis, who's running the SAGE project. The SAGE project is just this: innovative reform ideas that can be systematized all across the government, ideas that are out of the box, the best private sector ideas being imported to government, and Paul Francis has been doing a great job running that project, and I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Governor. Commissioner DeStito and I are going to talk this morning about a major initiative to manage support functions such as procurement and real estate on a statewide or enterprise basis. This effort to create an enterprise shared services model is an important part of the governor's broad mandate to SAGE to modernize state government so that the government operates more efficiently, provides the best possible services to taxpayers at the lowest possible cost. Now, simply stated, shared services means managing in a centralized way back office functions that today are managed by each agency for itself. These are functions that are common to all agencies, and so they lend themselves to standardization of process and achieving economies of scale, and that leads to improved efficiency. This centralized shared services model is widely recognized as the most efficient and best practice by the private sector, and is increasingly being adopted in the public sector as well. To build this enterprise services model and achieve the savings for taxpayers that we're targeting, the state's been working with outside experts in 5 major areas: procurement, real estate, information technology, customer service, and business services. Now, we're talking about redesigning major parts of the state's operations. So these are big projects that require a lot of upfront planning and a lot of attention in their implementation. Our process in each of these cases has been to benchmark New York against best practices in the public and private sector. Howard Glazer talked about some of our benchmarking findings last spring, and we really found the state to be woefully behind in many areas. So we're working with outside experts to develop detailed plans to bring the state up to the best practice level of the public and private sector, and we're launching the implementation of these projects in stages so we can get some budget savings quickly and achieve more savings over a multi-year period as the projects are fully phased in. All of these projects have clear metrics to measure results and ensure accountability for savings and performance. In a moment, Roanne is going to talk to you about 2 of the most important of these projects in procurement and in real estate. But let me mention just a few things about the other areas that we're pursuing. In information technology, we're developing options to implement statewide solutions for for email, voice over internet protocol telecommunications, identity and access management so agencies can share applications, help desks, and data center consolidations. In customer service, we're planning to implement one of the state's first call center consolidations. This will involve co-locating the complaint handling function of the new Department of Financial Services with the state-of-the-art call center at the Department of Taxation. And in business services, the state expects to pilot its new statewide financial system with many agencies later this year. I'm now going to turn this over to Commissioner DeStito, who will talk about the real estate and procurement initiatives.
Thank you, Paul. And I just want to say that one of the reasons I wanted to accept Governor Cuomo's offer to join OGS was because of my work with Government Operations Committee, because I shared the governor's view that we spend too much on things the government needs because we don't spend smartly. Today, I would like to focus, as Paul said, on procurement and real estate. In June, the governor's office launched the strategic sourcing project, which we estimate could save $100 million in the 2012-13 year. The actions we are taking could produce $600 million in cumulative savings over 5 years. MWBEs and small businesses will also benefit from the new purchasing program. We will balance our savings targets with the administration's policy goals of encouraging small businesses and MWBEs. As part of this effort, the state is creating a center of excellence for procurement. This means that experts in purchasing from OGS and all other agencies have been paired with specialists from Accenture to help us permanently transform New York's procurement techniques. Working across the agencies, the team is implementing a strategic sourcing process. We are no longer acting as independent agencies. We are acting as a team to reach a common goal. We are now beginning to put all of our research into practice by competitively bidding projects under the new system based on what we learned. The first 15 areas that you see up here that we are focusing on for savings include vehicles, food, and office supplies. But let's now talk about one of the 15. Now that winter is coming, it's perfect time to look at road salt, as some of my colleagues who use it will attest. By using our new methods to rebid this contract, which had not been competitively bid since 2002, we attracted an additional vendor which helped make pricing more competitive, and the state is estimated to save $2.4 million. For local governments, savings are even greater. We anticipate they will save more than $7 million, and the average price per ton went down 3.2%. And now we will turn to our real estate and our optimization initiative. In the capital region and downstate, the state owns or leases more than 22 million square feet, 5.8 million downstate, 16.7 in the capital region. We have a vacancy rate of 25%. This is a waste of taxpayer dollars. We'll focus now on the capital region. Here in the capital region, we are well on our way to eliminating 3,000 vacant seats in state-owned buildings through our restacking initiative. Offices and cubicles that have sat unused, sometimes for many years, will be restacked. We will restack and realign where people will go to work each day. We estimate that the state will save $9 million in lease costs annually starting in the year 2012-13. We anticipate the three-phase process will be completed in 18 months, and OGS and the Department of Health are the primary occupants of the Corning Tower, so we will go first, consolidating our space here to make room for agencies leaving the formerly leased space. This smart sizing will normalize the vacancy rate and reduce it from its current 25% to approximately 10%. In the end, we will create a space management system that will keep us on track as the needs of the state change over time. Thank you, Governor, and thank you for allowing me to participate.
Thank you. Thank you very much and well done. The constant exercise here is looking across the silos, if you will. You know, temptation is agencies become isolated, They become compartmentalized. Every agency does everything for itself, when there is much more efficiency, economy of scale, when we operate as one. So thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Paul Francis. It's an ongoing project, but that's good progress. Thank you for that. We'll now turn to Commissioner Courtney Burke and Clarence Sundrum. When you look at the state functions, trying to find efficiencies, trying to find economies of scale, a lot of it is about saving money. Probably the single most important function is we take care of people, and we take care of vulnerable people whose lives are literally in our hands. And our level of care makes a significant difference on their quality of life. And that is OPWDD. And starting in January when we first walked in, the Commissioner, then joined by Clarence Sundrum, were tasked to come up with a comprehensive review of the entire system to see how we could make it better. We were chatting inside a little earlier. Clarence Sundrum actually goes back before even me in Albany, I want you to know. Clarence worked with Governor Carey, who was the governor before Mario Cuomo, and on just these issues and just these questions. How is the state caring for vulnerable populations? How can it do a better job? And he is a national and international expert in the area, so his advice and his perspective has been invaluable to us, and Commissioner Burke has been doing an extraordinary job. With that, who wants to go first? Clarence?
I will, Governor. Let me start by thanking the agency heads who I've been pestering over the last several months for information and data. I know I've driven your staffs crazy, but I appreciate the help. I couldn't do it without you. Let me just start by describing what it is we're talking about. This is probably one of the largest enterprises of the state government in terms of caring for vulnerable people. We touched the lives of 273,000 people last year in residential care at the end of the year. And some of these beds in the system actually turn over many times over with short-term care. So this is an area of government that spent last year $7.5 billion across 6 agencies that run everything from psychiatric hospitals, developmental centers, group homes, nursing homes, adult homes, residential schools for children with disabilities, substance abuse treatment programs. So it's a very massive enterprise of the state government. There are over 11,700 of these programs scattered across the state. So the challenge of managing something this large is quite considerable. And the common obligation that the state has at its core is to keep the people in these settings safe. Most of them are there because of either a disability that impairs their ability to protect themselves or some kind of life circumstance like being elderly and infirm. So this is a very central obligation of the state government. And one would assume that because there is this common obligation, we have a common way of expressing what the public policy is for protecting and providing safety for this population. But what I've found so far in my examination, that if you look across the state agencies and the different programs, and that's the axis that goes from left to right, everything from the Department of Health's nursing homes to the children and youth facilities to OMH and OPWDD programs and educational programs in state and out of state. I looked at several common standards that you would expect. Do all these agencies define abuse and neglect? Well, surprisingly, some don't. Do they have an obligation for reporting abuse and neglect when it's discovered? Some don't. How do they define abuse and neglect? When they do define it, the definitions are all over the parking lot. Some define it very broadly, some define it very narrowly. Do they place an obligation upon providers to investigate abuse when it's reported? Surprisingly, some don't. When they ask investigators to investigate, do they require that the investigators be trained in doing investigations? Some do, some don't. So if we had a consistent policy, that whole chart should be green, but obviously it isn't. And one of the things that's notable is if you look on the column on the left-hand side, and I realize it's kind of hard to read, but this is the left-hand column is the Department of Health's regulation of nursing homes. And this is the most robust system. It was put in place in the 1970s in the wake of the nursing home scandals. And you can see for that column, we have just about all the safeguards in place that one would expect. Where the health department itself does investigations, they require providers to do investigations, and so on. But the very next column over, which is how the health department regulates adult care facilities, you can see there are lots of reds. They don't require incident management. They don't have definitions of abuse and neglect. They don't have a time frame for investigations to be completed. They don't require any trend analysis. And if you go over to the far right, which is the out-of-state schools to which we send disabled children, we know practically nothing about them. We have no expectations about what these facilities do. We don't have any regulations that govern it. They're not required to tell us when there is abuse and neglect. We have 650 kids who are going to these schools at the average cost of about $220,000 a year. The state of New York spends $140 million a year supporting these kids, and we know virtually nothing about what goes on with them. And as you come more to the center, you can see the three mental hygiene agencies, which by and large have pretty decent policies and procedures, although there are areas in which there is room for improvement. I mentioned before, agencies have different definitions of abuse and neglect. For some agencies, you can report abuse and neglect only if it's performed by an employee. Other agencies say, well, our obligation is to keep somebody safe, so if the source of danger is a consultant, a volunteer, somebody else who comes into the facility, we want to know about that. We want to respond to it. Still other agencies, as I said, don't have any definitions at all. They don't have a definition of neglect, which means that none of that has to be reported. If the source of danger to you is a person with whom you're sharing a room who assaults you physically or sexually, some agencies require that to be reported, others don't. The issue of reporting crimes to law enforcement, you would think this is something that there ought to be a common standard for. Well, some agencies require in their policies and procedures or in law that if there's reason to believe a crime has been committed, report it to law enforcement. Others say if there's reason to believe a felony has been committed, report it to law enforcement. Still others say if the district attorney has told you in advance to tell him about crimes, then tell him. So we don't have any consistency in public policy when it comes to dealing with this vulnerable population. When investigations are done, the standard of proof by which you substantiate an investigation also varies tremendously. Child Protective Services, which runs across all of our children's service agencies, has a very low standard of proof of some credible evidence, which essentially means that if the allegation is not just laughable, you indicate it. But what that means is you cannot use that investigation to discipline an employee because you have a completely different and higher standard of proof to discipline employees. You cannot use that standard of proof to keep somebody in the central register and bar them from employment because that requires a higher standard of proof. So we are having layered on multiple investigations with different standards of proof that are using up time and resources and ultimately not providing for safety and protection. And some agencies, like the adult care facilities, have no standard of proof at all. So here again, there's tremendous variation, and there's no good reason for any of that. Now, where all this comes to the crunch is that there are at least 112 providers in the state that have licenses from multiple state agencies. So these programs are being regulated under different standards by different state agencies with different thresholds for reporting, different types of things that need to get reported, different responses that are required. And sometimes all of this comes to bear on a single campus where you might have a school that's run by a provider with a license from the state education department. There may be a group home that either OPWDD or OMH has, a substance abuse program on the same campus, a children's foster care facility, and all of them have different standards. So what the challenge here is to come up with a more consistent articulation of public policy that lays out very clearly what it is that we want our providers to do. And I guess to illustrate the magnitude of the challenge, if you look at this pyramid that's there to sort of conceptually lay out the issue, all we've been talking about is the stuff at the top of the pyramid, the statutes, regulations, and policies. those don't have a day-to-day impact on people's lives, although they clearly articulate what our expectations are. The most important thing for safety is what's at that base of the pyramid. It's the capacity of people to protect themselves, it's the quality of the staff and the training of the staff that needs to be done. And those are the things that Courtney Burke is going to talk about as she is going about her job of reforming OPWDD. I want you to think about the plight of a person who is in a residential facility, whether it's a nursing home, an OPW group home, who doesn't have any family, doesn't have anybody who visits them, has no friends, no community contacts. All the stuff on the left side of that pyramid is not there. So their dependence on the things that government does to make sure that there's staff supervision, that you have sound providers of character and competence, that they have incident review processes, that there are boards of directors who take their fiduciary responsibilities seriously, that state licensing and certification holds them accountable for meeting standards. All of those things are critically important to the safety of these people. And that's the challenge that we are going forward with right now. I will have recommendations to the governor on creating a more simple, consistent, effective process for the reporting and investigation of abuse and neglect, and also for dealing with the challenges of the frontline workers. Thank you, Governor. I'll turn over to Courtney.
Great. Actually, Clarence's slide is a great slide for my presentation, because what I'm going to go over is going to talk a lot about what's on the right side of that pyramid that we've done in the first 6 months since I've been in this position, and then what we hope to do in the next 6 months that focuses a lot on what's on the left-hand side of that pyramid. But just a brief overview of the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. The agency serves 126,000 New Yorkers with various types of developmental disabilities, everything from cerebral palsy, the autism spectrum disorders, mental retardation, epilepsy, learning disabilities. It's a very big system. We have over 23,000 employees who work for the state, but we're not even the biggest part of the system. We're actually only about 20% of the providers. The majority of services are actually provided by nonprofits. We operate over 1,000 group homes as well, so you can see it's a very disparate system that requires a lot of oversight. So some of the problems that we identified, and if you look at the first bullet, I don't actually consider that a problem. It's great that we have a diverse population, but they all have individualized needs and very different ways of being treated. But if you look at that in comparison to the workforce that's actually providing care for those individuals, we previously have had no qualifications for the workers in our system. We also had no way for automation of tracking of incidents within the system so that we could find out if things were happening in a timely way. And we didn't have certified investigators to investigate a situation if an incident happened. We also determined that there were too few relationships with law enforcement. On occasion, some of our regions or some of our homes would have a relationship with law enforcement, but for the most part, on the large part, there was no consistent relationship in how they were reporting things to law enforcement. There was also inconsistent practices in how we dealt with discipline of employees if there was an incident, and barriers to getting bad employees out. And finally, we believe that there's a lack of transparency with the agency. Parents, families don't always know the quality of the services they're getting. And then a culture of non-reporting, so employees not always feeling safe in reporting if they see an incident happening. So our initial reforms are looking at all these different areas. And so some of the things that we've initially done, we focus on the workforce. So that was one of Clarence's things on the bottom of your pyramid that you pointed out as being one of the most important. Beginning in April, we raised the qualifications for our direct care workforce so that all employees who are direct care workers must now have a high school diploma. They must go through psychological and drug testing and be checked against the child abuse registry. We also implemented consistent hiring standards across all of our regions to make sure that we're getting the best employees that we can. We've trained our staff on abuse prevention and reporting so they know how to recognize it, they know how to report it, and they know how to prevent it. And we've developed a talent development consortium, which is both consisting of people from the state workforce as well as providers from the voluntary not-for-profit side to determine what are the core competencies that people should have if they're going to work in our system. What should direct care workers be able to know and prove that they can do? What should supervisors be able to know and prove that they can do? And let's make sure that's consistent across the entire system. We've also looked at how we can better work with law enforcement and how we can shore up our own investigatory process. So one of the first things we did was require immediate reporting of possible crimes. Previously, it had been 72 hours. We felt that that was too much time, that evidence could be lost, people could change their stories, and so we implemented that. We've also automated and required within 24 hours that when there is an incident, it is entered into an automated data system. Previously, that was not consistent. Not everything was put into our data system, so we had no way of tracking to make sure that incidents were being resolved and dealt with in a timely way. We also have now linked, when an incident does happen, with our investigations unit so that they can begin their investigation as quickly as possible. And then also linked that with our employee discipline system so that if something does happen, it's substantiated by our investigations, we can take appropriate action on the employee immediately. We've also worked with the state police to develop a memorandum of understanding so that when an incident occurs in our system, we know what we should be reporting to them and they know how to handle that situation. Over the next 6 months, we'll be working with other levels of law enforcement to have consistent practices with them as well. We've centralized our investigations. It used to be that our investigators were located out in the field and they were basically investigating people they worked with. As you can imagine, that does not result in good investigations, and so we centralize investigations and then raise the standards for our investigators to make sure that they were actually certified, that they know what they're doing. We now have 51 newly certified investigators and a new lead investigator who has an investigatory background so that we know our investigations are much higher quality than previously. We've also looked at how we can have better disciplinary processes and make sure we're keeping good employees. So one of the first things we did was institute no tolerance, required reporting of abuse so that we know that things are being reported, even though I know, Clarence, you said our agency is better at reporting than some, we know we can do a much better job. We're also looking to send a message back to the front lines about the importance of reporting and the importance of no tolerance. And so what we've done is to institute a policy to suspend employees with substantiated cases of egregious abuse. We want to make sure that people at the front line know that if they report something, there are actually consequences. We're looking to pursue termination in the arbitration process for egregious cases. We also think this sends a strong message back to the front line for employees that if they do report something, that something will actually happen with it and there will be consequences. And the governor was successful in his negotiations with the unions this year to have us work with them to develop a consistent table of penalties in the arbitration process. So if you have an egregious case where you really have a bad employee that you know really shouldn't be working there anymore, that it's a given that they will be then removed from the system. We have yet to negotiate that table and what's actually in it and what it will look like, but I think it was a tremendous success on the part of the governor in getting that in the contract negotiations. We've also been looking at culture change. I think that's really one of the most important things we can do long term, since it is such a big system, is to make sure that people feel safe about reporting. So one of the first things we did was go out into the field to over 1,000 of our state-operated homes. We made unannounced visits by leadership, so these are people like myself, our regional directors, going out and saying, hey, you know, we're out here, we care about what you're doing, we want to make sure you're supported. Do you know how to report abuse? If not, here's how you report it. We also trained all our staff, all 23,000 employees, on promoting positive relationships. How do we support the people we're serving? And we've done a number of things to enhance our communication with employees directly through various media outlets, and instituted what we called an I Spoke Out campaign, where we've mailed out posters to all of our homes that includes information about how people stop, prevent, and report abuse, so they have access to the phone numbers and information they need to be able to report it. We also want to make sure that our system is accountable to the public and more transparent. So when providers in our system in the past, when they weren't doing well, people didn't necessarily know it. Individual and families didn't know if there was a provider that might be considered one that was having trouble. We have now made that information public. As soon as we have trouble with a provider, we put them on what's called an early alert list so that people know that they're having trouble, and the provider themselves have an opportunity to clean up their act. And we have had some that have actually come off the list already. But we want to make sure that parents and families have access to that information as well. Over the next 6 months, I think our challenge and what we intend to do is to make sure that all of these different reforms that we've implemented in the first 6 months are being consistently implemented across the state and are being consistently implemented by our not-for-profit providers. We think there are more areas where we can implement safety reforms, and ultimately we want to measure our performance. It's great, it's a long list of things that we've done, but we want to know that this is really having an impact on the performance of the system. One of the things that we've also been doing in tandem with this is looking at how we can restructure the delivery system overall to be more person-centered, to allow families and individuals more choice about the services they're getting. So the governor has been working with the federal government on negotiating how that would happen, because a lot of the services in our system are funded by Medicaid, and as most of you know, Medicaid is a program that's jointly funded by the federal and state government, and they're a partner in this. So they want to help us in figuring out how do we make our system more innovative, how do we make it more person-centered. So we're negotiating with them about having a little bit more flexibility in how we do that. We want to make sure that our system is also sustainable over the long term. We've got a lot of new people coming into the system with new types of disabilities, a lot of kids who have autism that are in the school system that are going to be aging into our system. So we have to make sure our system is sustainable. We want to change the way we're measuring quality so it's more based on personal outcomes rather than a checklist of does your agency do this, do that, and so on. We want to have individuals and families be able to choose more services and, again, increase the ability of people in our system to have more control over services they're getting. So we've done a lot, but we have a lot more work to do, and we appreciate all of the support that we've had from the governor's office. Governor, thank you.
You know, Mr. Sundram, some of those findings are startling to me and obviously troubling. Maybe when you finish your report, you could come back and present it to this group. I'm sure that they've seen the preliminary information. Everybody would be interested in seeing the final report.
I'd be happy to do that.
And I think between the two presentations, you see the full spectrum of what we deal with, right? The Roanne's presentation and Paul Francis on SAGE, that's about making the government work better, more efficiently, better services, but it's about money, which is important nowadays, especially with the way the economy is going and the concerns of the taxpayers, how much we spend, the taxpayers getting their money's worth, that's very important. The other end of the spectrum, we are responsible for people's lives, literally. I don't think it's overly dramatic to say many of these operations can make the difference between life and death, and they certainly make the difference on an individual's quality of life. Mr. Sundram's point that nursing homes have a more refined system, because nursing homes were put under the magnifying glass by government, and there was a thorough investigation, there was a lot of publicity at one time, and the system there is more sophisticated, more advanced. But if you don't continue to reform, if you don't continue to reinvent, the progress stops. And that's what happened for a long period of time in this state. And that's what we're going to change. So thank you. Very well done. Very informative. And again, Clarence, maybe when you get the final done, we'll invite you back. Okay. Because it's so much fun to be here.
Governor, there's a potential for layoffs in PET, and there's also this
I've heard.
consolidation that's going on. Do those two things dovetail at all? I mean, does the consolidation have anything to do with potential layoffs, and how are the talks going with that?
Rick, they don't dovetail. They are separate. Obviously, our plans for consolidation, our reorganization, the SAGE efforts we announced in January. We said we needed savings in January to balance the budget, $450 million. I was hopeful at that time that we could accomplish the savings without a single layoff. That's what I said. For many months, I believed that's what was going to happen. The CSEA contract was the big hurdle, right? And then the agreement with the PEF leadership was the second biggest hurdle. So for many months, we believed we were going to accomplish just that. When the membership rejected the leadership's offer, I think that caught everyone by surprise, and we're still trying to work it out so there are no layoffs. So the consolidations, if you will, Rick, That is a separate track, that was a separate project, and it's not just about consolidations. Make the government work better. You know, money is part of this, but more than the money, it's also the service. Make it work better. So consolidations we talk about as an economic measure. It's also an efficiency measure. A lot of the more collaborations that we can draw among ourselves, among these operations, I think the better. I think it's true for the state. I spent 8 years in the federal government. It was certainly true in the federal government. Rather than running these individual silos, how do you cooperate and how do you form a dynamic synergy among the agencies?
Governor, following up on that question, you've got no layoff provisions for CSEA. If that does happen in PAC, does that hamstring your ability to consolidate?
I don't have no layoff provision with CSEA.
Well, there's language in there.
That says,
I am not familiar with the exact language.
it doesn't say no layoffs. It says, again, what we would hope even this year, we don't want to do layoffs. Doesn't say no layoffs. It says if situations change, if there are material changes, if there's a financial downturn, but it's not a no layoff pledge. But Eric, that's in the future years. But my position is the same this year. I don't want to do layoffs. I never wanted to do layoffs. I needed the savings.
Governor, you speak in the past tense. You believe that we wouldn't have to do layoffs. They're slated to start next week, and as you said, conversations are ongoing. Can we avoid them, or is it too late?
Jimmy, it is in the controls. No, who's we? Let's define we here. The PEF membership will decide whether or not there are layoffs. Now it's going to be, frankly, the PEF leadership and the membership. The leadership would have to determine that they want to do a second vote, and then the membership would have an opportunity, if they decide to do a revote, to cast their ballot. But, you know, from my point of view, CSEA, we obviously went through both hurdles, and then we had an agreement with the PEF leadership, which was rejected by the membership. So it is up to PEF. It is up to the leadership and the membership of PEF. And your suggestion in the question, well, how about our posture in this situation? CSEA accepted the agreement, and the membership ratified the agreement. So I think that affirms the reasonableness of our offer. Also with PEF, we said we would be flexible on the financial terms as long as it's revenue neutral, right? So you have a number of variables. You have furlough days, amount of contribution for health insurance, et cetera. As long as it's revenue neutral, we've worked very hard to be flexible on what works best for the membership. The quote-unquote layoff language is basically what we've said with CSEA, which is the best we can do, just on a reasonableness standard. So I think we are doing everything we can do. We have done everything we can do, and it is up to the PEF leadership and the PEF membership.
Speaking, those two separate entities, if you reach an agreement with the PEF leadership, whatever it is, an agreement of principle on something tweaked, would you forestall those layoffs on the 19th pending a ratification vote?
You know, Jimmy, I don't want to negotiate the contract in the press. I think you have seen all through this process a commitment to trying to get to an agreement, a flexibility, and a reasonableness on our part. And we would continue. But the first step is, will the PEF leadership vote for a revote? And it's a little bit of a different dynamic now because the layoff notices went out. But on the first situation, you didn't know who was going to get laid off and who wasn't. Now the layoff notices have gone out. So people have notice who's laid off, who's not laid off. And I don't know how that dynamic plays out.
So they need to have a vote before the 19th?
They would, I believe the procedure is, they have an executive board meeting next Monday. and they would have to decide at that meeting whether or not they want to have a revote.
How would you describe the status of talks right now? What's going on?
They are ongoing. They're ongoing, they're professional, they're cordial. I know Ken Brynan, I respect Ken Brynan, I spoke with him yesterday. Howard Glazer speaks with him on a frequent basis. We have a negotiating team on the state that has been incredibly productive and flexible and creative, and that's how we got the situation done with CSEA. But it's up to them. It really is up to them. I don't want to see anyone laid off. Not one of these commissioners want to lose any workforce. I mean, just forget the professional level. On the human level, I don't want to see 3,500 people or so laid off. I don't want to see 3,500 families go through that. So anything we can do within the parameters of our reality, we have been doing and we will do.
Was Ken Brynan yesterday questioning your administration's commitment to actually coming up with tweaks, coming up with changes to the contract? What's your reaction to his comments about you and the administration?
Look, I'm sure, I don't want to comment on his feelings. We've had ongoing productive discussions. I know the conversations that I've been part of. They're creative. Everyone has shown flexibility and reasonableness.
Governor, the Daily News this morning reported that Joseph LaHoda is leading a pack of 6 candidates to take over the MTA. Is that accurate? And do you have any sense of the timing when the leadership change will happen?
I'm sorry, I didn't read the Daily News this morning, not as a statement of anything other than, who did it say? Can you repeat what it said?
Joseph
LaHoda.
LaHoda.
Who wrote that story? Was that a Luvit story? Joseph LaHoda. We're going to have an announcement on the MTA shortly.
Would that be today?
No, not that short. Days, let's say days. It's nowhere near.
Governor, I want to ask you about a story that was in the Wall Street Journal. They published a couple stories about SEIU 1199 and an increase in the reimbursement rate that the paper says raised money to go to a bailout, a health insurance fund for the union. I was wondering if you had a comment on if that story was accurate.
I didn't read the story. I believe that there was an arrangement with SIU that went back many, many years for health insurance, and we were honoring and reforming that agreement. Beyond that, I don't have any other information.
Governor, on the Tappan Zee Bridge, we finally, I think we're getting somewhere. But
Looks that way, but we're not sure yet.
But today I saw where the feds were only interested in giving $5 million, towards a possible $21 million restoration. Is that true, or?
Well, there's Tappan Zee. You have a number of, staying with the hurdles metaphor. The feds really aren't contributing significantly to the funding of the project, is my understanding. And the funding is a big question. How would you pay for it? How would the state pay for it? And we're looking at a number of creative financing vehicles to pay for it. You'd also have to, even before that, what is it you're building, right? There are a number of models of the bridge, which we're working through. Second, how would you pay for it? And we're working through a number of financing models. The federal government really isn't saying that they'll pay for it. The third is, how long will it take to get the approvals done? That's where the federal government says they'll expedite the approval process. The approval process, government approval process, to construct a new bridge, which is what this would be, could be years and years and years. As oxymoronic as that sounds, you need a new bridge and it's going to take years to replace it. But if you just let the process run, it could be multiple years. Here, the federal government says they're going to hand-pick a number of projects across the country and expedite the approval process, manage the approval process so it's done on an expedited basis. And they took 14 projects, and the Tappan Zee was one of them. That's very exciting from my point of view. We worked hard to get this designation. The bridge needs replacing. It's also an economic development measure. It's also a jobs measure. And it will also, as I was saying earlier this morning to another group of people, it will affirm our ability to actually do something, you know? How long have we heard about the Tappan Zee Bridge? The bridge is falling down, the bridge is falling down. But nobody can do anything. Replace the bridge. Fix the bridge. You're the government. Talk about performance, integrity, competence. Fix the bridge.
Governor, would you consider something similar to a transportation bond act to have a bridge bond act to finance this?
I'd consider a big bake sale. We sell cookies all over the state to build the Tappan Zee. We are getting very creative. This is a very big number to replace the bridge. And our budget is very stretched, so we're being very creative.
Governor, one of the options for the Tappan Zee Bridge was to include a mass transit link to trains or buses for rapid transit. Is that now being pushed aside because of money?
We're looking at everything, Glenn, and everything is money.
Governor, on Long Island, Arrow Electronics, the largest privately held company, announced yesterday it's moving its headquarters to Colorado. I was wondering, did the state try to match the incentives that Colorado offered? If not, why? What's your thoughts on the impact of the relocation?
I don't know, Yancey. Does anybody know? Howard? Anyone here? Pat? Patrick Foy?
The state provided Arrow with incentives several years ago. Those have expired. The Arrow did not reach out to ESDC for aid on this. I will note that there will be no change in employment on Long Island as a result of Arrow's move. The Arrow CEO currently resides in Colorado. That will continue with no change in Long Island employment.
Governor, the DEC's final hydrocracker report likely won't be out until after your budget address next year. Do you plan on including funds for additional staff for various agencies in your 2012-13 executive budget proposal?
Under your scenario, John, the DEC has not issued their report, and there's been no determination, and the budget is being presented?
Yes.
Then no.
No.
Under that scenario, no.
And if something were to come out during the budget process, then it might be reconsidered?
Yes.
Governor, Senate Republicans filed a court brief yesterday saying that August primary would be best to satisfy requirements under federal law. Where do you stand on this? Some people disagree, saying August is far too early and keep people out of town.
You know, Nick, we're working that through now with both houses, and we're having conversations to see if we can come up with an agreement that satisfies everyone, and the courts.
Should the federal government waive that requirement next year?
Well, we're in the middle of those conversations. I understand the federal government's point. They want to see progress, and that's what we're trying to show them.
Yesterday said that Wall Street could have 10,000 layoffs next year. Are you making plans how to deal with that potential in the budget and what that would do to the state revenue?
Prayer works. I believe in prayer. Bob Megna did a presentation on the budget before you guys came in, and I was listening as he went through his presentation on the budget. He's had a number of presentations. This presentation was the numbers are down. He had an earlier presentation earlier in the year where the numbers were up. He had another presentation where the numbers were sort of static. So, and he was right on each occasion, by the way. I think when you look at the snapshots, they can be misleading. The economy was stronger than anticipated earlier in the year, and the revenues were coming in better than anticipated. And we were hopeful that what was projected to be about a $2.4 billion deficit could be reduced. Then the economy went flat. Now the economy is down. So we're watching all these data points, if you will. And I think what the controller sees, other people see also. And the question is going to be, what's the future? You know, what's the next data point? And what happens to revenues? Right now, the revenues are plus or minus on a marginal basis where we thought we would be. But there's still time on the clock, and we have to see what happens with the economy, and that's anyone's guess.
Governor, do you think that the Occupy Wall Street movement that's continuing is serving any useful purpose, or do you concur with Bloomberg who says that it's bashing a vital industry in New York?
You know, I think it's, for the people who are demonstrating, it's accomplishing a purpose. That's why they're demonstrating. And demonstrations and protests, they're part of the system, they're part of democracy. There's a permitting process, there are rules and regulations, but it's for them to determine if it's meeting their purpose. I assume, since they're there and they're spending their time and their energy and their resources to do it, they think it's accomplishing a purpose. And that's democracy.
Does it have any impact on your thoughts, your policies up here in terms of their agenda as it's been described?
Look, I think to the extent their agenda, quote unquote, which depending on who you talk to, it's a multi-pronged agenda, let's put it that way, diverse agenda, but on the main point that there is frustration with this economy, that you don't have to go to Occupy Wall Street to hear that. You can walk down to the coffee shop down the block, you can go to any Main Street anywhere in New York, Main Street anywhere USA, and you will hear it from everyone. You will hear it from everyone.
I think the protest was more focused yesterday, for example, on the millionaire's tax. Does that resonate with you at all?
The millionaire's tax, we've talked about a number of times. I believe when you're talking about increasing taxes from a state's point of view, it hurts the competitive position of the state. President Obama has proposed a millionaire's tax on the federal level, which I believe would be the best way to accomplish that, where you have a federal tax code, federal collection, distribution to states. Anything else? Josh Vlasto's in a rush, but we have, otherwise we have time, John.
Just to be absolutely clear, absent a vote from full membership, is there any way, are there any circumstances where that October 19th deadline could be pushed?
You need the leadership. You need step one first, John. We haven't cleared the first hurdle. The leadership has to vote that the membership should revote. We're not even there yet.
So if they do that, would you consider pushing that October 19th deadline back?
Well, they have to meet next Monday. They then have to take a vote among the 170 or so executive committee that they want to have a revote, and then go to the membership. And then we would, you know, let's take one step at a time here. But that's the first hurdle. Will the 170 member executive committee vote for a revote?
Governor, just on the millionaire's tax again, do you expect
I'm sorry, Nick. Jimmy had a question who was then interrupted by John, but he was kind, so he let John go ahead. But I want to be just as kind and recognize your kindness. So, Jimmy.
To get to what Commissioner DeStino said, is we're moving and trying to consolidate state leases. What, if anything, will OGS and the state do to make whole kind of private office holders? Obviously, given the amount of space that's leased by the state in the Albany area, I think there could be fairly sizable impact on that on leases.
You're right, Jimmy, and we would be very aware of that in our negotiations. You want to save public tax dollars, but you don't want to destabilize private sector economy. So how you do those consolidations, the timing, the negotiation, you take that all into consideration. I'm sorry, Nick?
just I wanted to ask, do you expect to put more pressure on the millionaire's tax from Assembly Democrats, the Speaker, and do you think that argument will resonate more next year, considering the economic climate?
You know, Nick, I think it's pressure, no pressure. Look, there was pressure last time. I understand the argument. I think it's about the numbers and it's about the reality of the situation, and you make the best determination for the state at that time. I don't think it's about the pressure one way or the other. You know, my position on this has been well known. It's been well known for many, many years. It was well known before I became governor. I was very clear in the campaign. So I am where I am. Facts are what the facts are. And I understand the facts last year. I understand the data point this year. And we'll see what happens on the economy next year. But it's not about the political pressure one way or the other. You know, I try to keep it simple in this job. You do what you think is right, and you make the best judgment you can, and you're going to feel pressure from both sides, plus the top, plus the bottom. And it can't be about responding to pressure. It has to be about doing what you think is right.
So do you still expect to call for increases in education and healthcare spending in the upcoming budget as is called for in this year's budget?
Yes. Yes.
Governor, on the Tappan Zee Bridge again, Senator Charles Michelle was pushing this to be a public-private partnership, and so the hopes of the governor to sign some legislation that allows it to happen. Is that something that you're looking at?
Does he have money, Priscilla? Does his bill have money? Does his proposal have money? Or will he partner in a bake sale? If the answer to any of the questions is yes, I'll consider it. All right, thank you very much, guys. Thank you.